The film begins with her attending a therapy session where we discover that the therapist she had been previously seeing had resigned from work due to a stroke. The new therapist, Dr. Bormans, wants to know Claire's story, but Claire is hesitant to share all the details again. Something is definitely up. Claire finally begins her story with a man called Ludo, with whom she's in an intimate relationship. They are both shown intensely making love with one another from the very beginning of the film. Ludo and Claire had planned to spend the weekend together, but while Claire was looking forward to it, Ludo makes an excuse about some work in a bar and leaves her. They both sit in an Uber, and Ludo notices that Claire is not in a good mood. She wants to know if coupling was the only reason he wanted to be with her, and Ludo just dismisses her by advising her to not be boring. He wants to know what more she expects from him, because if she expected him to call over her sons and hang out with them, that wasn't going to happen. When she still looks upset, he tells her to drop him off at the corner and assures her that they would talk later. As predicted, however, that does not happen. She decides to call him that night after getting free from her work as a French literature professor, but when she calls his phone number, his roommate, Alex, answers. She inquires as to where Ludo was and if he could speak with her for a moment, but Ludo is heard telling Alex in the background that he doesn't know anyone by her name. Claire is offended that Ludo is brazenly neglecting her on the phone. What irritates her the most is when Alex hangs up without even trying to make a proper excuse for Ludo. Claire just sits in her office, stunned. Was this due to the fact that she was older than him? Sadly, she comes to the conclusion that he did not care as much about their relationship as she did and was getting bored by her. The thought of him leaving her makes her sad. As she stares at her laptop, a plan slowly comes to mind. She goes onto Facebook and creates a fake persona going by the name of Clara Antunes. She tries to come up with a likable age, and her mind hits upon the young girls in the subway train. If she was going for young and fresh, then 24 would be a good age. The recollection makes her smile, and she tells the therapist that being on social media for a single woman was like being two things, a spider or a fly. Sometimes you get trapped, and other times, you can trap someone in your web. Claire decides that if she needed to get closer to Ludo, she'd have to befriend someone close to him, so she sends a friend request to Alex, who was Ludo's roommate. She opens up his profile, marveling at his beautiful photography. She can't help hitting like on many of them. Just like you should if you like our videos. Alex notices this and accepts her friend request. Later at night, he starts chatting with her on Facebook. He thanks her for liking his photos and asks her what her job was. After thinking carefully about it, Claire decides to tell him she works in the fashion industry as a young event manager. Alex and Claire continue chatting till late at night. The next morning, we see Claire sitting and having breakfast with her two young sons, Max and Tristan. She asks them if their dad had bought his girlfriend over last night and what they did together. Her sons are reluctant to share details with their mother because they think she might get hurt listening to them, but she ominously assures them that it doesn't bother her anymore. Days later, we see Claire gradually getting more and more hooked into her phone as Alex continues chatting with her. They text late at night while being underneath the sheets, and even later when her son, Max, recites his lessons to her, causing him to abandon his attempts at doing homework with her. Claire narrates how wonderful it felt being online while knowing that the person you're chatting with was also online. It's crazy that a person so far away can see the photos you comment on and hear the music you like listening to. She recounts the great sense of comfort she felt every time she saw it. At a family gathering, we see Alex texting her again. He tells her that she can't continue on without him, and she sends him an embarrassed emoji back. Her ex-husband, Giles, notices her immersed in her phone and asks her aloud if everything was okay. But she just casually laughs it off by telling everyone that she's been receiving attention from one of her students in her class. All the guests are greatly intrigued by this, and Giles casually inquires if she wouldn't yield to the temptation of playing with fire. But Claire turns to look at him, deadly serious, and tells him she doesn't like to play. This turns the conversation into how men think it's their right to be with a younger woman, and Claire finds herself downing more and more wine. At night, she asks Alex what exactly he wants from her, and he tells her that everything about Claire's behavior intrigued him. It isn't much later that Alex starts requesting a photo of her, and Claire knows that she cannot deny him because he would for sure start suspecting her. Thus, the spiral began. Clara Antunes now had a face along with the profile. Now what Claire had to do was to work up the courage to call him. When Alex picked up, his initial thought was that Claire's voice sounded a lot different than he imagined. But to Claire's relief, it was in a good way. He told her he loved her voice and wondered if she was really 24. His reaction to the fake picture Claire had uploaded lifted her spirits greatly because he'd commented that she was the most sublime creature he had laid his eyes upon. At that point, the therapist gets concerned. She asked Claire why it did not bother her that the face of the woman he desired in his mind was of another woman. Claire, however, was sure that he had fallen in love with the personality behind the voice which represented her, even if the face wasn't real. She was not ashamed to admit that it was nice to be desired in this way, nice to be over, because let's say if the opposite really were to happen, and she was to reveal her real face and age, Alex would never approach her. Not a woman who had a washed-out, pale face like hers, with bags underneath her eyes. She was old now. Just an old, faded beauty. Over time, Claire shares a real phone number with Alex so that he could call her anytime he wanted. Anytime she saw she had like 9 missed calls from him, her self-esteem would soar to the skies. One day, Alex asks her if she was ever in love before. Claire tells him that, yes, she was in love with an older man once. He can't help asking what they talked about and what their interests were. She tells him they like talking about books, art, theater, all the things that Alex thought she would find boring. However, Claire tells him she has never so desperately wanted to talk to a man as much as Alex. And shyly he tells her the same. She confesses to her therapist that soon she didn't have to pretend she was 24. In fact, she had never felt more alive and young in her life than when she happened to talk to him. This change was also noticed by her ex-husband, who wanted to meet up with her so he could share his tour details. To his surprise, Claire seems barely interested and tells him the boys can stay with his girlfriend if he is away. Previously, Claire had always been touchy about letting his girlfriend anywhere near their sons, but now she wanted her to look after them. He knows that something is up and inquires if she's seeing somebody. Claire tells him that she has met someone who is tender and handsome, and everything they did together brought her great comfort. She tells him she's finally moving on from him and she couldn't be happier. The need to feel and touch Alex goes stronger every day. Claire is attending a party with colleagues of her age, but she can't get Alex out of her mind. Bothered, she takes herself to the floor and dances to her heart's content, pulling her hair out of her bun and drinking wine. Later, she sits in the car and hurriedly calls Alex. Their conversation soon grows hot and heavy as they both get aroused, resulting in a carnal but entirely virtual. She explains to her therapist that she had long been wanting to be sensually engaged with someone who'd make her feel alive and wanted. She then turns the conversation towards the therapist, asking her inappropriate questions about her getting intimate with her clients, or if her story had an arousing effect on her. She wants the doctor to own up about herself as well, but the therapist reminds her that she was just Claire's temporary confidant until her actual therapist returns, and coolly tells her that their relationship had limits that were established by medical codes of conduct. After that, things with Alex take a complicated turn, as he starts begging her to meet him in person. But for Claire, that is a limit she absolutely cannot cross. She knows he'd leave her immediately if he knew the truth about all the lies. And even if he didn't, she didn't have the courage to confront him and find out. When he insists upon wanting to meet her, she makes up an excuse about having to take care of her niece. Max and Tristan watch patiently from the sidelines, waiting for her to stop the car so she could pick them up. But Claire still hasn't convinced Alex, so she keeps driving the car around the parking area, all the while gesturing to them that she was on an important call. They both look at each other and cannot understand their mother's odd behavior. Inside the car, Alex exclaims he desperately wants to meet her and wonders if she takes their relationship seriously. Claire tries to convince him that she loves him and wants to meet him as badly as he did, but she cannot make it sound convincing enough. Still, she somehow manages to get off the call, but worries what her next move will be. While watching Max play basketball, she gets extremely agitated when the referee doesn't penalize a player for charging hard into Max. She rudely tells the referee to borrow her glasses. Her sons are concerned at her behavior and Tristan tries his best to calm her down. Back at the therapist's, she wonders out loud what the doctor really thought of her and her story. But Dr. Bormans only tells her that if she knew half the things that went through her mind, they would make Claire fall out of her chair. Claire laughs at this, but inside she suspects that the doctor probably has begun to judge her. Claire finds herself describing how one day she manages to get hold of a video of Clara Antunes pole dancing and sends it over to Alex. Watching the girl perform so sensually on the pole makes her grow smaller and smaller inside herself until there is no Claire, rather there is only Clara. She finds that happening a lot more on the days when the boys are with their father. However, something in her narrative has piqued the doctor's interest. Where had she got a hold of these pictures and videos? She wants Clara to tell her the truth. Initially, Clara denies that the girl was just a random person she found on the internet. But under the doctor's skeptical stare, she finally spills the beans. The picture is of her niece, Katia. This revelation shocks the doctor and she insists on knowing more. Claire reveals that her niece was an orphan due to her parents getting involved in a helicopter accident. Katia had lived for a short period with Claire, but was now in Norway. The doctor asks her seriously if she had asked permission from Katia to have her pictures and videos being shared to Alex, but Claire gets defensive and replies in negative. What had she hoped to achieve by doing this? Had she wanted Katia's life? Defensively, Claire replies no. She had just wanted her own. While Alex and Claire talk, the conversation gently turns to him. Claire asks him if he would still love her if she was older, maybe 50. He tenderly assures her that he would still love her if she was 50, or older even. He'd love her forever. Elated, she walks on, feeling that her bubble of happiness would never burst. But there does come a day when the happy bubble pops. Alex announces he's leaving for a 2-month trip to Goa with Ludo. Claire immediately freezes. She already cannot imagine her life without him, and him being so far. It scared her. Alex tries to convince her to come along with them, They'd finally be able to meet each other in person, but Claire knows she can't. Not with her history with Ludo. Not with the fact that she was in her 50s. Not with the false lifestyle she had created around her fake identity, Clara Antunes. A frightened Claire waits for her therapist. Something momentous had happened. Alex had tried to track her to her location. He wanted to surprise her after returning from his trip to Goa. Panicked, Claire ran down the university halls and onto the street. Lo, behold, Alex was standing there right in front of her in all his masculine beauty. She felt his eyes land on her, but they looked right past her, trying to locate Clara Antunes. She could only stand on the sidelines and watch him, petrified, while he tries calling her and then leaves, dejected. Why had he tried finding her? Everything was going perfectly, with just the calls and texts. Terror-stricken, she hesitatingly calls him later. His voice immediately comes on the speaker, and he demands to know why she hadn't wanted to meet him because he knew she was there. He brushes over Claire's excuses of being unable to, but then something happens. Tristan and Max return home. They find her talking on the phone and she panics. She tries convincing him to hang up, but he's adamant to know whose voice was in the background. The boys are loudly talking about wanting something to eat, so she walks into a private room, unable to take more of this, and decides to tell Alex that she's been in a fractured relationship with a guy named Giles. She makes up a story about meeting him a few months before she had met Alex, and that he was jealous and paranoid, so he doesn't know anything about them. All of this quite rightly shocks Alex, who can only think she's been wasting his time and playing around with two guys. He hangs up quickly after that and Claire breaks down in tears. Alex leaves her a voice note later. He just tells her that if she cared about him, then she only had to be at the train station in Montparnasse at 3 o'clock. He just wanted to have one chance at finally meeting her. The music is heartbreaking as Alex steps off the train looking for his lover. But he's only surrounded by strangers and an older lady who watches him helplessly as he soberly moves past her and leaves the station. She follows him, even when he's sitting looking vulnerable and heartbroken. She can see him, but she cannot bring herself to talk to him. She knows that she cannot continue with this farce. She decides to tell him that her boyfriend Giles had asked her to marry him and she had said yes. She was soon to move with him to Brazil. Claire confesses that every moment with him had been like a dream, but it was time to wake up. She wants him to be happy and to know that he'd always have a special place in her heart. Claire recounts to her therapist how her transition back to her old life was like reading a terrible book. She is helpless, devastated, and feels older than she's ever felt before. As time went by, she tried looking him up on his Facebook profile, but he had deleted it. Alex had really proved he was far more mature and loyal to her than she ever was. Maybe even stronger. His disappearance made her more curious each day as to what happened to him, and she realized that the best way to truly find out was to meet up with an old forgotten friend, Ludo. She asks him to meet at the university. Then, after some small talk about her and her work, she asks him how he was doing. He seems hesitant about sharing what occurred, but at her insistence, tells her that he was currently dealing with something bad. His roommate Alex got into an accident. He drove his car off the cliff, and the doctors immediately pronounced him dead. Ludo tells her he cannot believe that Alex would go to such great lengths over a psychopath he met over Facebook. His voice soon melts away as the devastation of the truth finally hits Claire like a truck full of bricks. Alex had let go of himself because of her. All because she had been too afraid of not being able to meet his expectations. Days later, the only way Claire can come to terms with the grief and loss is by writing a story. A story that laments what she and Alex could have been if things were a bit different. A story where they both are given a second chance in life to undo all their wrongdoings. A chance to give Alex a different and better reason to move on from life. She hands this story to Dr. Bormans and asks her to give it a read. It is titled The True Confessions of Claire Milad. The story would depict her choosing to go back to the moment when he came to meet Clara Antunes at the train station. When he'd have no success finding her, she would sit with him on the bus. There, she would casually introduce herself. She would ask if he was acquainted with Ludo, and when he would affirm, she would compliment his beautiful photographs. She would then ask him if he would handle a personal project for her. She needed a talented photographer who could take a good photo of herself for the back of her book. She imagined he would be happy, as he was always on the lookout for work as an artist. While leaving, he would ask for her name, and she would give him the truth, Claire. She imagined him turning up to take her picture. She would put on minimal makeup for him, not to look different but to look true to herself. He would compliment her beauty and ask her if she was married. This time her answer would be yes. Not only married but divorced as well, and a mother of 2 young boys. She would openly talk about the 20 years she spent with the man she thought was her soulmate, and how he left her for a girl who was young enough to pass off as her daughter. She would talk about how changed her appearance forever, and now her body just does not look as youthful as it once did. He would be entranced by her, and they would fall in love with each other. They would spend every waking and sleeping moment with one another, cycling, reading books, and making up for the lost time. But one day, he would confess something strange to her. He'd tell her that he found her voice the most captivating, and the truth would hit her. He was in love with Clara, and she, Claire, could never replace her doppelganger in his heart. So she would willingly do a cruel thing. She would send him a message from Clara begging him to meet up with her. They would be on a date discussing future plans when he'd get that message. Because he loved Clara, he would immediately make an excuse to Claire and leave to go back to the house they are living together in. There he would call Clara and the cell phone on her desk would ring. From there on, the circle of lies she had spun would begin to unravel. He would discover Clara's profile on her laptop and come to know the truth. Claire would find him walking back into the restaurant, his eyes hauntingly upon her face. She knew he'd have many questions, but instead of answering, she'd walk back out in the street and let a She deserved an ending like that in this relationship she had built on lies. The doctor has finished reading her story and stares at it. In the next therapy appointment, she asks Claire why she did not want a happy ending, and why she chose to in a fantasy. The doctor suspects that someone has caused Claire great pain in her life. At this assessment, Claire reveals that the person who had her own niece, Katia. When she was brought to Claire's home, she had acted strangely around Giles, her husband, and chosen to be hostile with Claire. And the sad result was, Giles ended up choosing the 24-year-old Katia over their 20-year-old marriage. In other words, Katia wasn't in Norway, she had eloped with her own aunt's husband. The therapist asks Claire if Katia's betrayal was the reason behind her using her pictures, and Claire affirms. In order to reclaim back what was so cruelly snatched from her, she was willing to use Katia's beauty, youth, and even her happiness. The doctor then tells her that Claire's pain came from her never being able to free herself from the past. She was always chasing after the glamour of eternal youth, but that was a thing of the past, and if Claire keeps on chasing it, then she was just choosing. Claire bitterly confesses that she would rather choose to. Why was it that the only time a man willingly chose to be with her was when she had created an illusion? The doctor feels like there is something missing in the story, a huge puzzle piece that was perhaps in Ludo's possession. So she drives over to one of the work sites that Ludo was working on. There, we get to know that Claire was not the only one who lied. Ludo lied as well. He narrates to the doctor how he found out about Claire pretending to be Clara when Alex had made him listen to a voice note many months ago. Of course he had recognized her voice, but he thought that Claire was just trying to play a game with him, a perverted, horrible game. Ludo confesses that he could not bring himself to reveal the truth to Alex, but had tried his best to steer him away from Clara. Her existence was destroying him. But when Claire chose to finally let him go, he had witnessed how painful it was for his friend. This had made him lie to Claire about Alex taking. He was sick of her brainwashing games with Alex. Now, the man in question resides in the south of France, happily married. Just last month, he became a father. The movie ends on a happier note. Claire takes the doctor's advice and reads the manuscript of her story. There, she can see many potential endings. The road of happiness is no longer blocked for her, and the doctor and patient say their final goodbyes to each other.